Picture this. You're completely lost. Not metaphorically, literally lost. Navigating a city you don't know, walking in circles for 20 minutes, passing the same coffee shop 3 times, and someone walks by, clearly a local, clearly unhurried, and you think, I should ask them. But you don't. You pull out your phone instead, or you just keep walking, quietly hoping the street you need will somehow appear. And the wild part? You're not even embarrassed about being lost. You're embarrassed about needing to ask. Sound familiar? There's something deeply strange happening in moments like that, because logically, asking for help is one of the most efficient things a human being can do. It saves time, reduces stress, and connects you to someone who has exactly what you need. It is, by every rational measure, the smart move. And yet, for a lot of people, maybe for you, it feels almost physically uncomfortable, like something about it goes against the grain of who you are. Today, we're going to figure out exactly why that is. And I promise, by the end of this, you're going to see that resistance in a completely different light. Let's start with something that surprises most people. The reluctance to ask for help has almost nothing to do with stubbornness. That's the common assumption, that people who won't ask are just too proud, too stubborn, too stuck in their ways. But psychology tells a much more interesting story. What's really going on is quieter, deeper, and far more human than simple ego. It starts in your nervous system, actually. Your brain, as sophisticated as it is, still carries millions of years of evolutionary wiring underneath all that modern complexity. And in the ancient social environments humans evolved in, dependency was genuinely risky. If you needed too much from your group, resources, labor, protection, you could become a liability. And liabilities in small, survival-dependent communities got left behind. So your brain developed a very efficient alarm system around the act of asking, a signal that says, be careful here, this could cost you your place in the group. You're not living in a prehistoric tribe, obviously, but your nervous system hasn't fully gotten the memo. So when you go to ask for help and that subtle wave of anxiety rises up, that's not weakness. That's actually your ancient threat detection system doing its job, just slightly miscalibrated for the world you're actually living in. But evolution is only part of the story. The other part gets written much earlier in your personal history. Think about the environment you grew up in. Not necessarily a dramatic or difficult one. Sometimes the most ordinary upbringings quietly teach us the most powerful lessons. Many people who struggle to ask for help grew up in households where self-reliance was treated almost like a moral virtue, where getting things done on your own meant you were capable, admirable, good. Nobody said never ask for help. They didn't have to. It was the atmosphere. It was the unspoken pride in figuring things out yourself, the subtle discomfort when emotions got too visible, the way certain needs were quietly treated as inconveniences. Children absorb these lessons without a single explicit conversation about them, and then they carry them into adulthood like invisible instructions they never agreed to follow. Here's where a really fascinating psychological mechanism enters the picture. Researchers studying social behavior have identified what they call the burdensomeness belief, a quiet, often unconscious conviction that your needs are too much, that you are somehow more trouble than you're worth. It's not a belief most people would consciously endorse. If you ask them directly, they'd deny it. But it lives in the hesitation before sending a text, in the phrase, I don't want to bother anyone, in the way some people apologize just for existing in someone else's space. And here's the paradox that makes this really worth sitting with. The people who carry this belief most heavily are very often the most generous people in the room. They show up for everyone. They help without being asked. They give their time, their energy, their attention, freely and warmly. But the moment the direction reverses, when they need something, that same generous openness closes like a door. Why? Because giving keeps you in control of the dynamic. You decide the terms. You're in the expansive position, the capable one, the reliable one. But asking flips the script entirely. Suddenly, you're visible in a different way. Suddenly, there's a version of you that needs something. And for people whose sense of identity is built around being the person others lean on, that shift doesn't just feel awkward. It feels like a crack in the foundation of who they believe they are. Psychologists sometimes call this the helper identity trap. It's when your self-worth becomes so thoroughly fused with your usefulness that receiving starts to feel like a kind of failure. Not consciously, nobody thinks it that clearly, but emotionally, the message arrives loud and clear. Capable people handle their own things. And then underneath all of that, there's a fear that almost nobody names out loud. It's not really the fear of being told no, it's the fear of what being told no would confirm. Because when you ask for something and the response is reluctant or dismissive, or worse, when the help comes but with visible inconvenience attached, it doesn't just sting in the moment. It lands on something much older, a suspicion you've been quietly carrying that maybe, on some level, you don't quite warrant the effort. So you protect yourself by not asking. The silence becomes armor. Imperfect armor, lonely, isolating, exhausting armor, but familiar. And familiar always feels safer than vulnerable, even when it isn't.
Now, here's the part that should genuinely change how you think about all of this. There's a body of research in social psychology that has looked at what actually happens, not what we imagine will happen when we ask for help. And the results are striking. We consistently and dramatically overestimate how burdensome our requests will feel to other people. We build elaborate mental simulations of sighing, reluctance, and judgment. But in reality, when someone is genuinely asked for help, they overwhelmingly feel trusted, they feel valued, they feel closer to the person who asked. There's even a name for the neurological experience of helping someone who asked sincerely. Researchers call it the helper's high, the same warm, rewarding sensation that comes from generosity and meaningful human connection. Your brain lights up when you get to be genuinely useful to someone you care about. Which means that every time you quietly struggle alone to avoid burdening people, you may actually be denying them something they would have found meaningful. The gap between how we imagine the ask will land and how it actually lands is enormous. And most of us are living inside that gap, protecting people from an imposition they never actually felt. None of this is solved by simply knowing it, of course. Understanding a psychological pattern intellectually doesn't instantly dissolve the emotional resistance underneath it. The resistance lives in the body, in the tightening chest, the practiced deflection, the automatic "I'm fine" that comes out before you've even checked whether it's true. Changing it takes something more patient than information. It starts with learning to notice what you're actually telling yourself in the moment before you decide not to ask. Not the surface reason, "I don't want to bother them," but the belief beneath it, because that's where the real story lives. And once you can see it clearly, name it honestly, it begins to lose the quiet authority it's had over you. The person in your life who always seems to need nothing, who carries everything without complaint, who laughs off struggle and refuses every offer of support, that person isn't stronger than everyone else. They're often just working harder to hold a particular image in place, and the image is costing them more than anyone sees. If you recognized yourself somewhere in what we talked about today, if some part of this felt uncomfortably familiar, then here's something worth sitting with. Asking for help isn't a crack in your capability. It's an act of trust. It's you handing someone the opportunity to show up for you the way you've always shown up for everyone else. It's you finally stepping into the warmth you've spent so long creating for other people. You were never meant to carry everything alone. No one was. That's not strength. It's just loneliness with better posture. So, does any of this resonate with you? Is there something specific you've always found yourself quietly handling alone when you didn't have to? I'd genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. And if this kind of exploration interests you, the hidden psychology behind everyday human behavior, then stick around because there's a lot more where this came from.